Hello, a very warm welcome to this special edition of Middle East Matters. Over the next 12 minutes, we'll be bringing you exclusive reports and analysis ahead of the Kurdish referendum due to take place on September 25th. Now, the 6 million-strong Kurdish population in Iraq has long sought this independence, and this is one of their first official opportunities to voice their dream. But the vote has been heavily criticized by officials in Iraq, across the region, and even further afield in the United States. The Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has even described the referendum as unconstitutional. Let's now take a close look at who the Kurds are.
Who are the Kurdish people and why do they seek independence? In the 12th century, Seljuk Sultan Ahmad Sanjar was the first to create an official Kurdish province. Today, 30 to 40 million Kurds live in those same territories, but borders are disputed. Kurdistan stretches across parts of Turkey, Iran, Iraq and Syria. The Kurds are of Indo-European descent and live within those nations' populations. Maps of Kurdistan resurfaced in 1919 after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The 1920 Treaty of Sèvres attempted to secure Kurdish autonomy, but that failed. 3 years later, world leaders signed the Treaty of Lausanne, which excluded Kurds. Living as a minority, Kurds have faced repression in Turkey, where Abdullah Öcalan created the PKK, or Kurdish Workers' Party, in 1978. The group's armed fight for an independent state has cost thousands of lives. Turkish intelligence arrested Öcalan abroad in 1999. The PKK has since shifted its strategy, scrapping calls for independence, instead pushing for autonomy. In Turkey, Kurds make up 20% of the population, and a watchful eye is kept on the Kurdish contingency in northern Syria, who show similarities to the PKK. In Iraq, the Kurds have already been governing their autonomous zone since the Gulf War in the 1990s. Iraqi Kurdistan, led by Masoud Barzani, is one of the country's most stable entities. Western powers now consider the Kurds a key player in the fight against Islamic State group jihadists.
Now, although Kurds are bracing themselves for an uncertain future, one thing is for sure, and that's the very fact that the vote's been divisive both within Iraq and on the international stage. François Wibo brings you the pros and cons of this contentious referendum.
Not a single empty seat in the whole stadium, and the pitch itself packed with people. They've all turned out to support the referendum and hear strong words from President Barzani.
We chose a path to live together with Baghdad willingly. But if they don't want to be our partners, we refuse to be their servants.
Rallies like this one have been held all over the country, even in the most remote areas. In the small village of Tel Sakif, crowds filled the room to back the Yes campaign.
The yes vote is the symbol of freedom and of democracy. It won't create sectarianism in Iraqi society. It will only stabilize and consolidate our society.
The provincial parliament in Erbil, holding its first session in 2 years, recently greenlit the referendum process, while lawmakers in Baghdad refuse to recognize the legitimacy of this vote. The No campaign also has its own figureheads. Shaswa Abdul Wahid, the powerful media mogul behind the NRT group, has funded a campaign dubbed No for Now.
We will choose the no because we think it is better for our people. It is better for the Kurdistan's future. We know that this referendum is not for the Kurdish independence.
Others fear that independence would completely cut Erbil off from Baghdad.
This referendum is organised by our government to get their hands on the oil. In my region, we're very dependent on Baghdad. We get many goods from the capital.
If the referendum is approved, there will be many thorny issues to resolve. But for the moment, Kurds must answer a straightforward question: yes or no to independence.
Now, one of the regional countries flexing its muscle against the Kurdish referendum is, of course, Turkey. Our correspondents on the ground delve into exactly why Ankara has even threatened to take all necessary steps.
A year ago, Selim Kurbanoğlu was the mayor of a district of Diyarbakır, one of the largest cities in Turkey with a majority Kurdish population. Today, he is one of dozens of elected officials suspended from their posts for their alleged links to the PKK armed group, considered a terrorist organization by Ankara. He was released after 3 months in detention, but still faces up to 15 years in prison.
This is extortion. Let the people decide. Let the courts decide. But since they don't recognize the courts or the fact that we got 60% of the vote, then the only thing left for them was to bring in someone from the outside.
While awaiting the end of his sentence, he remains in contact with his constituents. Many express their support.
The pride of the Kurdish people has been shattered, and so were their political ideals. The pride of the entire Kurdish society has been shattered.
But at his party's headquarters, an entirely different subject is on everyone's minds. All their attention is focused on the referendum for the independence of Iraqi Kurdistan, due to take place on September 25th.
We stand with them and will respect the result. That is what democracy is about. This will have a direct impact on us as Kurds. What happens there will be binding not just for us, but also the entire world.
Here, everyone hopes that the creation of a Kurdish state would push the government to review its policies regarding this minority.
I think the Kurds will be content if there's a Kurdish state. After all, it's what the Kurds want. It's what they've been struggling for. And I hope they succeed.
1,500 kilometers to the west, in the center of Istanbul, the atmosphere is electric. The far-right Turkish party sees the organization of the Iraqi referendum as nothing less than a provocation, and their words are menacing.
Şaka hiç yapmıyoruz. Bedel ödemekten bahseden Barzani şarlatanına bedel ödettirecek de güçteyiz.
Turkey has called on Iraqi Kurdistan to cancel the referendum. If they don't comply, Ankara has threatened to impose severe sanctions.
Let's bring in Renaud Mansu, who's a Middle East Research Fellow at Chatham House for analysis on the Kurdish referendum. He joins us from London. Renaud, let's kick off with that big question. Will this referendum take place on September the 25th, despite coming under fire from all angles?
Well, it seems that nonetheless, all signs are pointing to the fact that the referendum will take place. The president of the Kurdistan region, Masoud Barzani, has on numerous occasions said, we're not backing down. So very much he'll have to save face by going through with the referendum.
Now, this vote is facing immense opposition, as we know, from not just Iraq, but also countries in the region, including Syria, Turkey and Iran. Is that mainly because they fear contagion from their respective Kurdish populations?
Well, that's always been a big reason for it, sort of the fears of irredentism. What will happen if there's a Kurdistan in one part? What will happen to other populations of the Kurds? So very much that's been one of the arguments, but of course there are other kind of arguments as well as to empowering a new neighbor, a new state that really have fears, particularly in Iran and Turkey. Syria as a state kind of isn't as able to have foreign policy at the moment.
Now, why would you say this referendum is so important for the Kurdish population, despite the fact that it's stirring so much controversy?
Well, for the Kurdish leadership, particularly in Iraq, they're looking in a sort of a post-ISIS settlement process. They're looking to fill vacuums to maintain influence. They don't have the same amount of power as they used to within the Iraqi government. They don't have as much leverage as they would with the Americans anymore, for example, who are kind of looking at, okay, the Peshmerga were a powerful ally, but now we're no longer really fighting ISIS. So the Kurds have lost many of their bargaining chips, many of the kind of weight that would put them on the international stage. And so very much, and from an external perspective, I think the leadership in Kurdistan is saying we need some kind of bargaining chip. And this very much, the threat of independence or the fact that we are and we desire independence is easy, it will allow them to still maintain some kind of relevance or some kind of power in terms of negotiations for a post-Islamic state Iraq.
And let's look further afield to the US, which has historically been very supportive of the Kurds, going far back as the Iraq War even. They've even provided aid handouts. Now, why has Washington decided to join the chorus of critical voices now?
Well, Washington has always been adamant on the territorial integrity of Iraq. The 2003 Iraq war didn't go as planned, and to some extent, the breakup of Iraq could be seen by some in the State Department or some in the policy circles in Washington as a consequence of the U.S., and so a failure of that operation. But nonetheless, as in the past, you don't really have new states being recognized, not in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world. There is this kind of desire to maintain territorial integrities of many states, and so Kurdistan, unfortunately, notwithstanding self-determination calls, is part of this inertia.
And do you think that this could in any way impact the American and Kurdish alliance, who've actually joined forces against the Islamic State group in the region?
Yeah, and it's not the first time. I mean, the Kurds have been, since the 1960s, have in different parts been fighting with the U.S. to no avail when the question of independence emerges. So it's hard to say. I mean, it's very difficult for the Kurds. They're not in an ideal position, a landlocked territory without many allies, with strong regional antagonisms. It's hard for me to say that the Kurds can afford to anger the U.S. or the UK or any of our Western allies that they've worked so many years to maintain and build really strong relationships with.
Now, how would you say is the dynamic between the Kurds and the Iraqi government going to evolve if the Islamic State group is at some point defeated?
Well, this has been what we've been kind of saying for some time now. Everyone was, addressing how to get rid of the Islamic State, the so-called Islamic State. But what comes next? What is the political settlement? And nobody has really touched that issue. There are many issues between Erbil and Baghdad, between Abadi and Barzani, that are still there. These include disputes over land in northern Nineveh and Kirkuk and elsewhere, disputes over revenue sharing, disputes over oil and gas. None of these have really been addressed since 2003 at least. So very much political settlement at the moment still seems far away. With this referendum, again, it's a lot of posturing, and the fear is that this could affect those negotiations that have been stalled for some time now.
Renaud Mansu, a regional specialist from Chatham House, thank you for speaking to us. And as always, thank you for watching Middle East Matters. Do follow the show on Facebook, Twitter and podcast. Stay tuned.